Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Believe it or not, this is actually our 5th deep dive into this whole fascinating, sometimes kind of disturbing topic.
It really is, and there's still so much ground to cover.
Absolutely. It feels like peeling back layers, doesn't it? Secrets just under the surface. So today, we're jumping right into the immediate aftermath of World War II. You know, the guns might have fallen silent on the main battlefields, but peace. Not really.
No, not at all.
Instead, the world just plunged into this new kind of mess, didn't it? Alliances shifting, these big geopolitical chess games starting up, and these really unsettling whispers, these rumors about secrets hidden way out there in the most remote places, and, well, particularly Antarctica.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're pulling from some pretty interesting bits from a YouTube video transcript. The title translates roughly to War Games for Antarctica, Who's First is Best. But what if someone is already there?
Ooh, intriguing title.
It is. It really paints this picture of a world, you know, still reeling from the war, but already, like, intensely focused on the next move.
So our goal today, our mission, is to really unpack that immediate post-WWII period. We're looking at those clandestine maneuvers, the politics behind the scenes, and these claims that just won't go away about, well, a possible Nazi presence down in Antarctica.
Yeah.
What was really going on? What did it mean for the big powers? And did they actually find anything on the ice?
It's chilling, isn't it, how quickly the winners of one war can become rivals in the next?
Yeah, setting the stage for this global game where even like the most remote continent suddenly becomes a really important piece on the board.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. 1945, it wasn't just VE Day or VJ Day, was it? It was like the starting gun for the Cold War.
Abruptly, yeah. The very allies who had, you know, banded together to fight Nazism suddenly found themselves looking at each other across this massive new divide.
And former enemies.
Yeah.
Suddenly in really weird, complex new positions.
That shift was, well, it was immediate and stark. Think about it. The U.S. starts pumping huge amounts of money, the Marshall Plan, right, into Western Europe.
Right, to stop communism.
Exactly. Shore them up against the perceived Soviet threat. But at the same time, Great Britain is kind of left holding the bag, tasked with cleaning up the last pockets of Nazi resistance. The cracks, you know, they started showing even before the war was officially over. At the Yalta Conference, February 45.
Right, where they were already carving things up.
Pretty much, laying the groundwork for all the suspicion that came later, even about Antarctica. And by the time the war in Europe actually ended, May 45, those cracks were huge chasms.
Yeah.
Germany was just exhausted. But there was so much disinformation flying around, so much secrecy about what the Allies had actually found, that partnership that beat Hitler, it just wasn't sustainable.
And Stalin wasn't exactly ready for peace, was he?
Not at all. Unlike the West, which was desperate for peace, Stalin wasn't about to give up any territory he'd gained. He pretty much expected more conflict, maybe even wanted it.
Which leads us to this really weird part. The Soviets. Instead of just dismissing all these wild rumors about a Nazi base at the South Pole or Hitler escaping.
They kind of let them fester, didn't they?
Yeah. It seems like they almost encouraged it.
Well, the whole Nazi survival story didn't just stick around. It actually grew right after the war. It's surprising.
House.
Well, just before Berlin fell, the Soviets intercepted this document, apparently one of the last intercepts out of Europe. It described Martin Bormann.
Hitler's right-hand man.
Yeah, him. Talking from Hitler's bunker with a Grand Admiral, probably Dönitz, to someone in Tierra del Fuego.
Argentina. Always comes up, doesn't it? The Nazi.
Long seen that way, yeah,
Right.
even though Perón publicly denied it. And then you had this very public spat between General Zhukov and Stalin himself about whether Hitler was actually dead or had escaped.
Which just poured fuel on the fire.
Absolutely. And publishers back then, they caught on quick. Nazism, mysteries, dark secrets. It sold books. It was good business.
Wow.
And then there's Operation Paperclip. Can't forget that.
Right, the U.S. bringing over Nazi scientists.
1,600 of them. And look, some were just scientists, but others were, you know, deeply ideological Nazis. They didn't just flip a switch and abandon all that.
So they brought their beliefs with them.
Over time, yeah. And their presence fed into this very real worry about Nazi groups still operating overseas, maybe with access to advanced knowledge or even technology.
Okay, this context is,
Yeah.
it's vital because it puts Great Britain in this incredibly tough spot, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial.
A nation that just went through hell,
Yeah.
now trying to hold on to its global standing, but also maybe the only ones who would actually check out these Antarctic claims.
It was, yeah, a real double-edged sword for Britain. On one hand, holding the Falklands gave them this unique logistical advantage.
Proximity.
Exactly. They could investigate these claims. Top German Nazi claims, mind you, about some kind of Antarctic country, a Fourth Reich starting up in the south. And right after the war, those first few months, Britain was pretty much the only country that could actually project force down there and do that kind of digging. But the U.S. They were stretched thin, war with Japan just ending, Cold War ramping up, and they were, frankly, caught off guard and maybe a bit humiliated.
By Britain acting alone.
By Britain acting so aggressively, so independently in Antarctica. So the U.S. reaction was swift. Policies designed to, well, basically dismantle the British Empire's remaining influence, prevent them being a global power, reduce them to an ally in name only, essentially. And this wasn't totally new. This identity crisis for Britain had sort of started back in 1942, tied into the U.S. push for globalization.
Like denying them the atomic bomb.
That's a huge example. British science was key to making it, but they were shut out. They got worse treatment, worse recommendations than other Western nations right into the 50s.
And forced to let go of the empire.
Forced to grant independence or self-governance to most of it, yeah. So Britain comes out of WWII technically a superpower, right? But U.S. foreign policy, especially things like the Marshall Plan, really put them in their place.
U.S. called the shots.
They became the only country that could really lean on Britain. And you see it later, Suez Crisis, 1956. British soldiers still dying for essentially U.S. foreign policy aims.
Yeah.
It's a sobering thought how quickly things shifted.
It really is. Just an astonishingly fast decline in global power. But okay, given that diminished status, how realistic was it that Britain was really the only one capable? Or was it maybe a bit of a nod from the U.S., like, you guys go first, stir things up?
That's a fascinating question. Hard to know for sure what happened behind closed doors.
Right. But all this maneuvering, it brings us back to the ice, to New Swabia, this supposed German base from the 38-39 expedition. Did it exist? What was there?
Well, the idea of it hidden in these, like, huge cave systems,
Right.
It was considered plausible enough that the British set up their own bases across Antarctica during the war, specifically to counter that perceived threat.
Okay.
Now, officially, British expeditions stuck mostly to the Antarctic Peninsula, but there were rumors, undocumented trips, focusing on Queen Maud Land.
Which the Norwegians had named.
Right, named for their Queen Maud, who was actually Queen Victoria's granddaughter, interestingly. The Norwegians had been all over Queen Maud Land since the 30s. Flying planes, photographing, sketching.
Finding anomalies.
Big time. Flights in 31, 36, they found unknown areas, identified these anomalies. Things that hinted at warmth under the ice, maybe geothermal activity, subglacial lakes, caves. Suddenly, an underground base seemed a lot less sci-fi.
Huh.
Lars Christensen even dropped a Norwegian flag from his plane back in 31. Sort of an unofficial claim. And weirdly, some early maps based on those photos, they left out some of the dry areas and lakes they'd apparently identified.
Omitted them. Why?
Good question. There were talks, apparently, between Norway and the British monarchy about whether Norway should formally claim it. They thought Queen Maud Land held incredible hidden riches.
And then the Germans showed up.
Right. And just 6 days before the first German recon flight over that area, January 14th, 1939, Norway rushed out a royal decree claiming the region.
Cutting it close.
Very. The German expedition itself, Captain Richer's flights, they were actually well publicized at the time, took over 1,500 photos, mapped a huge area.
But the records vanished.
A lot of them, yeah. Films, research materials, supposedly destroyed during the war. Though, again, rumors persist about copies hidden away in archives somewhere, much like those missing lakes on the Norwegian maps.
It all feels very convenient, the missing information.
It does. And this whole question of New Swabia, it wasn't just academic curiosity, it kicked off this intense scramble. The war might have ended in Europe, but it felt like it just moved south to the ice.
So how did Britain, already struggling, handle this next phase?
Well, in the Antarctic summer of 45-46, the British were flying hard. Mapping, scouting base locations, they found plenty of suitable spots. And that intelligence, that really drove their campaign against New Swabia.
But they were quite bold about it, weren't they? Acting alone?
Arrogant, some might say. Sending troops independently of the U.S., then issuing those provocative stamps in February 46.
Right, the ones that look like a claim on the whole continent.
Exactly. Commemorating fighting Nazism, sure, but the message was clear. Staking a claim. And here's the chess move. Britain publicly acted outraged when the U.S. launched Operation High Jump, this massive naval task force.
But privately.
Privately, it was likely a facade. Britain knew the score. The U.S. was the new superpower. Antarctica wasn't going to be carved up for profit by anyone else. So Britain just stopped. Halted its flights, its operations for 2 years.
Let the Americans have a go.
Gave them free rein, yeah. But it wasn't out of friendship, you know? British intelligence thought they knew a lot about what the Germans had down there. They were sure it wasn't just one base.
Oh, they let the U.S. go in, hoping they'd fail.
That seems to be the theory. Let the Americans take the risk, maybe hit a wall, and, well, the British weren't wrong. High Jump didn't exactly go smoothly.
A very shrewd play by the British, if true. They basically said, okay, we destroyed the German base, nothing more to see here, militarily speaking, and stepped back, assuming the U.S. wouldn't find anything else.
And the Americans kind of walked into it. They needed intel fast. Within those 2 years, Britain gave them. Operation High Jump was huge ships, thousands of men, officially mapping, unofficially, finding out what was really there after the British claims.
And they found stuff, the dry areas, the warm lakes.
They did. Huge media buzz back home about it. But then, Operation High Jump, planned for 6 months. It ends suddenly, abruptly, after just 8 weeks.
8 weeks? Why?
The official line. Military confrontation with unknown military technology.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's all very murky, lots of secrecy. But the rumors, the witness accounts, they talk about encounters with advanced aircraft, flying discs, things the U.S. Navy definitely didn't have, heavy losses, apparently, a sudden unexplained retreat.
A confrontation with Nazi holdouts, with advanced tech.
That was the implication. And think about it, armed Nazi bases, unknown tech after the war supposedly ended. That kind of information leak would have caused absolute chaos. Politically, internationally, even the Soviets would have reacted unpredictably.
Just staggering. But the U.S. didn't just give up after that, did they? Nope. Not deterred for long. The very next summer, 47-48, they organized Operation Windmill. More targeted, designating specific areas of interest. USS Edisto, USS Burton Island leading the way.
So back to exploring.
With a vengeance. Burton Island was back again in 48-49, flying intensive missions over Queen Maud Land. This time, scouting for a joint expedition, Norwegians, British, Swedes planned for 49-52.
And their goal?
Explicitly, to check out and verify those German discoveries from 38-39. Britain and Norway, they knew the area the Nazis had used wouldn't match the old maps from the 30s and early 40s.
Why not? Because of the alleged aces.
Partly that, maybe, but there was also this really out there theory that maybe some kind of explosion, something powerful enough, could have created a temporary warm front.
Heated the land.
Enough to cause snow, actual precipitation on areas that hadn't seen water in millennia. It could have drastically changed the landscape.
Wow. Did they find anything? They found small mites, weird lichens, definitely biological oddities for Antarctica. But those widespread lakes and dry areas that previous expeditions kept reporting, not mentioned in their findings, vanished again.
Okay, that's just weird. So what's the explanation? Were all those earlier expeditions just making stuff up?
It's just by photos are
Or
weird.
was the post-war climate perfect for burying inconvenient truths?
Yeah.
Anything that might upset the New World Order, especially anything about ongoing German activity in Antarctica.
Like sacrificing Admiral Byrd's reputation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A famous, respected explorer suddenly portrayed as unstable, prone to fantastic visions. It's almost darkly funny, isn't it?
Yeah, throw the hero under the bus to keep the story straight. Makes you wonder what else got canned, as you put it. What were they so desperate to hide? And who from?
Well, the scramble just got more intense after that, and more countries wanted bases, leading to actual, skirmishes.
Really? Fight? Seems like it. November 47, the British Hope Base burns down suspiciously. 1952, Argentinian troops apparently fired on British personnel coming back from that joint expedition.
Good grief.
Other incidents probably happened, but were hushed up for diplomatic reasons. And then, of course, it escalates massively in 82. The Falklands War, or Malvinas.
Britain versus Argentina.
Yeah. And Argentina's crushing defeat led directly to the fall of their military junta. But it highlights just how interested Argentina was, and likely still is, in Antarctica.
Because of the Falklands proximity.
Absolutely. They lost thousands, faced bombing raids on Buenos Aires. They had to concede defeat. But they never really accepted it legally. They still claim the Malvinas.
So that conflict could flare up again.
It certainly could, and the Falklands remain incredibly valuable to Britain precisely because they're the gateway to Antarctica, with all its supposed treasures and secrets.
And maybe even ancient technology. If those glaciers keep melting.
That's the really mind-bending possibility, isn't it? Melting ice revealing land hidden for ages, maybe remnants of lost civilizations, maybe technology we desperately need. It puts a whole new spin on the strategic importance.
All this tension, the fighting, the secrets, it eventually leads to the Antarctic Treaty, right? An attempt to calm things down.
Sort of, yeah. But first came the International Geophysical Year, the IGY, in 1958. That brought a huge amount of international focus and, surprisingly, cooperation to Antarctica.
Scientists working together.
Yeah. Americans, British were already there. The Soviets joined in too with their own, quote, strange and mysterious experiments. The whole idea of the IGY was for nations to kind of pause their land claims, share data, share resources.
It worked.
It was successful enough that it led directly to the Antarctic Treaty, ratified June 61, everyone agreed. Antarctica for peaceful purposes only. Military personnel, equipment okay, but no military bases, no weapons testing.
There's always a but, isn't there?
There is. The USSR, even as the treaty was being finalized, made it very clear they weren't leaving. They intended to keep all their bases operational after the IGY finished.
Setting a precedent, perhaps,
Yeah.
for how peaceful purposes might be interpreted down the line.
Exactly.
Wow. We've covered a lot today, a real deep dive into this tangled, secret history of post-war Antarctica.
Yeah.
From the Cold War kicking off, Britain getting sidelined, these persistent Nazi rumors, the expeditions, the clashes. It's just undeniable that this frozen wasteland held, and maybe still holds, some really profound secrets. Secrets that shaped global power for decades.
Yeah, and if you connect the dots, you really see how history gets written or rewritten. How nations jostle for power, and how even the most remote places on Earth become central to those games.
Makes you question everything, doesn't it?
Really does. What else is hidden? What lengths will powers go to keep things secret or to gain an edge?
So thinking about all this,
Yeah.
what really stands out to you, especially how much history seems to depend on what's revealed versus what stays hidden. And here's a thought to leave everyone with. Those glaciers are melting. They're revealing land that hasn't seen sunlight in maybe millennia. What secrets, what technologies, maybe even what evidence of ancient life might actually emerge from that ice?
And how would finding something like that change?
Yeah,
Well, everything. Our history, our future.
big questions.
Yeah.
And the deep dive will definitely keep digging into them. This is just one part of a much bigger ongoing story. We've got more to explore.
For sure.
I look forward to diving deep with you again soon.